Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on teaching beginners. Whether you are new to teaching or you're an experienced educator, working with beginners requires a special approach. So today in this session, we'll explore some effective techniques and strategies that can help you build a strong foundation for your students. We will also discuss some mistakes that teachers can make and how to avoid them. And we'll talk about some questions that you can ask your students. So by the end, you'll walk away with some practical ideas on how to make your lessons more engaging and more tailored to the needs of your beginner learners. So let's start. So as we move forward, let's take a moment to think about the question, who your student is. It's important to understand their background, their needs, and motivations they have. For example, there are so-called false beginners or people who have encountered the language before or who even learned this language before. You can ask those students about things they did in the classroom. You can ask what kind of teacher they had, and you can get some information about what was interesting for them and what they enjoyed doing, as well as what annoyed them. And of course, you can find out uh, about some interesting topics for your students. And this information can help you prepare the materials that will be more engaging for your students and that can help you understand what can be interesting for them to read or listen about. Now, let's talk about some myths that exist about how beginners should be taught. So first of all, it's not true that beginners should be taught in the same way as other students. First of all, and it's obvious because we understand they can't use the language yet. When we talk about most students who learn a foreign language, we usually say that they should speak more during the lesson than the teacher. Obviously, it's not true when it comes to beginners. They can't use the language anymore, but at the same time, they have a crucial need to be exposed. Like they need to hear this language. They need a lot of exposure. So in this case, we can say that the teacher can talk more than the students, but the most important is that students understand what a teacher says. And here comes the second myth, and it is that everything should be translated. Some teachers think that if students should understand most things that teachers say, and of course it's necessary because they need to know what to do and they need to understand what's happening during the lesson, that it's important for a teacher to know the student's first language and to use it during the lesson. But as we know, people learn a new language when they understand messages. And of course, we recommend our students to hear, to listen to the language as much as possible between the classes. But not everybody will do that. And for some students, their language lessons are the only places where they get regular exposure to the language. So it's important for every teacher to remember that the language that students are learning should be used as much as possible at the lessons. And of course, we need to change this language. We need to adjust it. We will talk a little bit later about that. But it's important to remember that you don't have to know the language that students, that is the first students' language that students use every day in order to teach them a new language, as long as you can adjust your language to students' level, of course. So it's important to explain some obvious things, obvious for us teachers, but not so obvious for our students. We should talk about the method, and we should establish the rules from the very beginning. For example, we should tell them that if it's possible, of course, if they understand us or if we have some mean of communication that can allow us to um, give them some information in their language. For example, if they don't know English yet, if English is the language that they are learning, we should inform them that as a teacher, I'm going to speak English as much as possible. Of course, I will make my messages very simple and very clear for them. And they shouldn't respond me in English. They can respond in their first language. And if I know their first language, then I will hear and understand what they say, but I will still try to answer in English. Of course, if my students don't know, I mean, if I don't know their first language and it's impossible for them to say something in English, they can use a translator. They can give me some information about what they need, but I will still try to answer them in English. And the main rules are that they can use any language they want, and they can answer me in English only when they think that they are ready. And it's not important whether they speak correctly or not. The most important thing is that I understand their message. So if they want, they can try to ask me something in English or to tell me something in English. And as far as I understand them, uh, and as long as I understand them, I will give them some information that they need. As I mentioned before, it's crucial to grade your language when you work with beginners. What does it mean to grade your language? It means to speak differently in comparison to when you speak to people who know this language well and people who can use this language. For example, when I talk to my friends or when I use my native language in everyday situations, of course, this language is very different from what I do when I record videos for students or when I teach students my native language. When I talk to students, especially to beginners, I try to make the sentences shorter. I try not to use a lot of words that they might not know. And of course, I change the pace of my speech. I try to speak slower. And with true beginners, sometimes I even speak words, not sentences. And um, yeah, we can help students understand by using gestures, by changing the tone of our voice. But the most important is to be aware of it all the time and not to forget who you are talking to. If you keep in mind that your language, that you should be very careful with your language, it will help you and your students use a lot of language that they are learning during your lessons. Okay, the next recommendation is to model things that you want your students to do. So of course they will do some exercises, or sometimes you need to inform them what they should do, for example, to read the text or to answer the questions. And sometimes for teachers, all the tasks in a course book look very familiar. and very clear, and it's obvious for teachers what should be done in this exercise. But it's not the same for students. For some of them, this task might be something new, something they've never done in their life. Usually, there are examples in every course book. Authors give examples at the beginning of the exercise. Usually, it's the first question or the first sentence, but students don't always pay attention to that and don't always understand the reason they see this example there, or sometimes they don't even notice it. So it's important for a teacher to not only give the instruction and to say what students should do, but to start doing it with them. And it might be also possible that the first sentence isn't enough, that you can read the first sentence for them and they still won't pay attention to what is given as an example there. So it's better to provide them with some guidance with the second sentence as well, with the third sentence, and gradually you can give them less and less help. So, for example, after you read the first sentence, which is done in their books, you can offer them to do question or sentence number 2. And while they're doing it, you might give them some prompts, some help, then a little bit less help with sentence number 3. Then they can do sentence number 4 by themselves, saying the answer out loud. And then you can say, okay, then number 5, 6, 7, and other sentences you might do silently, and you can write down the answers in your notebook, and like in some time, after 3 minutes, in 3 minutes, we will check them. So you see, when I talk, I use some gestures, I show some objects, or I show some imaginary objects, yeah, like my watch, so that students can get some more information while looking at me to understand what I'm talking about. And of course, it's a good idea to use the exercises that are a little bit similar. I mean, like if you do like a matching task, you can do it at your next lesson, then you can do it again. And when the student sees the same task that they have already done before, of course, it will be easier for them to understand what to do and they won't be confused anymore. Now, let's talk about some particular lessons or some particular aspects of lessons that you might have questions about, like how to teach this if I don't speak my students' first language. First of all, let's talk about vocabulary. So when your student encounter a new word that they have never heard before and they don't know the meaning, many teachers who know their students' first language tend to translate immediately, and I think this is the most effective way of conveying the meaning of this word to their students. But of course, it's not true. First of all, because not all words are translated in the same way or have the same meaning if they are translated in different languages. So in different languages, they might have different meaning. The second reason why it might be not so effective is that it creates a longer chain in the brain of your students. So every time they hear this word, they might first try to translate it into their first language. And only after that, they see the image that this word describes. Whether it's much faster if this image is connected to the word in a foreign language. Uh, it will be more helpful when they start speaking. And instead of thinking in their first language and then translating everything into the language that they are learning, they start thinking in the second language quicker because they don't need to do this extra work, this translation. But how to explain the word without translation, or at least to try to do that? Of course, when we work with beginners, we don't usually speak about some hypothetical situations or some abstract nouns or about some difficult, complex feelings. We talk about simple things that can be shown, and the first and the easiest way to do that is to use pictures. Especially if you work online, it's easy because you can find the picture in the internet and you can show it on your screen every time when a new word uh, comes up. Or you can use some objects that are around you, or you can prepare some pictures and some words in advance. As you can see in this photo, which was taken by me in my classroom, I used some pictures printed and laminated that explained the meaning of some adjectives like thirsty, busy, or angry. And some pictures had associations, like gave associations like Angry Birds, the game that many people know, or just facial expressions like sad. And of course, you can also use your face, your gestures, your hands. Yeah, you can mimic, you can give some information by using everything that students can see. This is the easiest way, and for most situations, adolescents, it works with beginners. When they have a little bit higher level, it will be also possible to give them definitions in English or to describe some situations or to give some synonyms or words that have similar meanings. But when you just start, you can work with a lot of pictures and it will be very useful. Okay, but the next question that teachers usually ask is about teaching grammar. So, okay, with words, it's easy. You can just show something. What about grammar structures? What about terms? What about rules? First of all, you should remember that it's not a very good idea to explain the rules to your students. They shouldn't listen to the lectures from the teachers. It's easy to understand why not. Usually, well, people usually get distracted easily when they listen to something that is a little bit more difficult or a little bit not interesting for them. Um, and if you think about it, a lot of things in any language can't be explained. I mean, yeah, we come up with some rules. We try to mm, categorize some things. Yeah, we try to group them. But in reality, there is no question why when it comes to learning the language. There are lots of things that can't be explained logically. Why do we use articles in one language and why there are no articles in another language? Why there are exceptions to the rules? Why people use ending s and not some other letter? Yeah, of course, we can talk about history. We can say that there were some things like in the 16th century that were the reason why we do that now. But is it really useful for your students to know in order to use these things in their real life? I don't think so, especially for beginners. There are so many things that they need to learn, and there is so much information that I think we should do everything to um, reduce the number of the number of these things rather than increase it. So again, you can use pictures to show some things that you can't explain because you don't want to use your students' first language. For example, What can you see in this picture? Yeah, it's a mouse. A mouse. A mouse, right? And now, how many mice are there in the picture? There are two mice. They are mice. These sentences you can say at your lesson to your student to convey the idea of the plural form of a noun mouse, of the noun mouse, yeah, which is an exception in English. You don't need to say the word exception. You don't need to say the word or to say a lot of different words to explain this situation. Like usually we need to add s to all nouns, but there are some words that are different and you need to remember them. You can just show and say and ask students to repeat. And then they might hear this word in different situations. They might see this word in texts, and now when they know the meaning of this word, and when they see it in different contexts, they will gradually remember that we say mice, not mouses. Um, and it works the same with all the other structures that you need just to show to your students. Yes, you can pronounce, you can say that, for example, um, I am a teacher. Yes, we say I am a teacher, but you are a student, not you am. You are a student. You can say that, but you don't need to explain a lot. I mean, you don't need to explain that this is the verb to be that has different forms in future, in present, in the past. No, your students don't need this information yet. They might be interested in it, but it can happen later. For now, all they need to know is that we say I am and you are. And I think you can agree that there is no logical explanation to that. All they need to do is to hear that a lot of times, enough times for them to remember, and to make it sound natural, to make it sound natural for them mm, to say I am instead of using other forms after I. Now let's talk about skills or how we can help our students to master some skills when it comes to the second language. And let's start with listening, because as we know, this is the first skill that is mastered, that is trained when we encounter a new language. If you think about ourselves and how we learned our first language, you will probably not remember, but you will understand that, first of all, when we were children, we listened a lot to people around us, to our parents and other people, and we heard how they used the language. So we had lots of exposure before we started speaking. As we know now, adults learn the language in the same way. Uh, Children, teenagers, like everybody learns a new language in the same way. It doesn't matter if it's the first language or the second. So the first skill that your students will encounter is listening. And as we discussed before, as I said before, this is the reason why you should try to use only the language that your students are learning during your classes. So the first exposure that your students get, and the first words that they hear maybe in a new language, they might hear from you. They should listen to the teacher, and they should start understand you to get this first experience of achievement that they understand some words in a new language. Um, of course, it might be difficult at the beginning if you only start teaching, but if you think about it, you may start with very simple words. Yeah, as I said, it could be words, not sentences. You can just show them objects. You can say words. If they want, they can repeat after you, but it's not necessary. They can just hear. You can just like show some things like a pen, and gradually you can build sentences using the words that they have already heard. So at the beginning, students start understanding their teacher. They start understanding their messages, and then you should give them the task. You should give them this information that they need lots of extra listening, um, so that they are not limited. That their lessons aren't the only place where they hear the language that they want to learn, because definitely it's not enough. And between the lessons, yeah, when they have time, they need to listen to the language. It's necessary for them to get lots of extra listening. And of course, at some point, you will want to use audio at your lessons, and you will want your students to listen to some prepared recordings from the authors of some course books that you are using. And in this case, you might want to prepare your students and to help them have realistic expectations. Because for some of them, it might be quite stressful uh, to, uh, to get a task of understanding something from the audio, let's say. Some teachers don't think about that because they don't remember how stressful it was for them when they started learning a new language. So what you need to do is to talk to your students before you use a recording in your classroom. You need to inform them that it's impossible for them at this point to understand everything, and it's okay and it's absolutely fine if there is a word that they don't understand in this recording, and if it's not the only one. Yeah, so if there are words that they don't understand, unless it prevents them from understanding the gist, the main idea of the recording. But as long as they understand what the recording is about, it's okay if they encounter some words they don't understand or they can't hear well. It's okay, it's all right, don't worry about that. Just try to understand in general, just tell me what you understood. And the next thing that is connected, that skill that is connected to listening is speaking, of course. We can start speaking only after we have listened to enough um, language. And listening and speaking are connected. The more we listen, the faster we start speaking. But of course, from the very beginning, you need your student to give you some feedback. So you need them to say at least something. And how to do that? Well, first of all, you can let students repeat after you. So when you say something or when you show them some objects, don't push them, but just give them this opportunity to decide by themselves whether they are ready for that. And if they are, they can try to repeat some words or some even sounds, some syllables. They can just say them out loud after you. Also, teach them some simple words, like yes, no, for example, or hello and goodbye. Some words that they need the most in communication with you, and then the words that they can use when they need to answer your questions. For example, after telling them that this is a pen, you can ask them, is this a pen? And they don't need to answer to give you a full answer. All they need to say is yes or no. And you can give them gradually some more words that they can use to communicate with you, like colors, for example, or the names of some letters. So when you show them the picture, you can ask them, what colors can you see in this picture? And these can be the first words that they can use, or numbers, for example. You can ask them, how many children can you see in the picture? Uh, Basically, all these simple words you can find in any course book at the very beginning. But just try to not to forget about them, and to always keep in mind what words your students have learned before, in order to revise them all the time. And when you show a new picture, before going into new material and before presenting some new vocabulary, you can ask them about the colors, about the numbers, or about time or season. Just remember what topics your students have already covered, to give them the opportunity to use these words again and again. And of course, some classroom language, some things that they might need to say if they want to ask you something, or if they want to inform you about something. Just don't give them too many of these expressions, because remember that their capacity isn't enough yet. I mean, like, they don't have enough memory to keep all this information yet. So give them only necessary things at the beginning. There are a lot of questions that teachers have about teaching reading. And unfortunately, many of us might have had not a very good experience in working with texts when we were school children. So let's see some recommendations that we have for you when you think your students are ready to start working with the texts. As we said before, the first skill that they should master is listening. First of all, they should just listen to the teacher, hear some words. Then probably they might want to say something. And only after that, it's a good idea to show them how these words are written. But the most important mistake that many teachers make is asking students to read out loud. Many times I saw in the classroom the situation when the students saw some words for the first time. They didn't know what the text was about, and still the teacher wanted them to read this absolutely new text for them for the first time out loud. And it caused a lot of confusion and stress for the students. They pronounced the words incorrectly, and of course, the teacher corrected them immediately. Um, they paused, they stopped, they were embarrassed. They couldn't understand what the text is about because they were thinking about their pronunciation and um, the strange situation that they were in, that they didn't know how to pronounce the words correctly and that they were making mistakes constantly. So it was quite stressful and not very effective. We should remember about the reason why we read texts, and the reason is that we want to get some information from these texts. The texts aren't there to give us some pronunciation practice. And if you want your students to work on their pronunciation, it's a good idea to give them some words or to find an exercise that was tailored specifically for this purpose. But not every text, especially a text with the words that might be new for your students, is good for this practice. The text is for a completely different reason there, to help students work with texts uh, in the same way that they might need to work with texts in their life. And think about the question why we read texts. We usually want to find some information there, or we just do it for pleasure because we enjoy thinking about ideas that are described in the text. So if we read silently in our everyday life, why do we have to read out loud during our English or other language classes? But the most important thing is that your students don't know yet how some words are pronounced. Uh, and at the same time, some teachers are afraid of these wrong connections in the brain of their students. Um, they are scared that their students might remember the words with the wrong pronunciation, and actually, it can happen because when they see the words, they still read them silently, they pronounce them, but silently in their heads, and if they don't know the right pronunciation, your students can pronounce the word using the sounds of their native language or how they would read this word if this word existed in their native language. So it's a good idea when you work with texts is to read out loud for your students or to play the recording because for many course books, there are recordings of the texts that are there in the course books. It's a good idea to play the recording and to ask students to track the words and to read at the same time. And this way, they will hear the right pronunciation of all the words. And at the same time, they won't be distracted by their own voice or by the voice of other students and by the possible mistakes that they can make. Also, it's a good idea to teach them how to find information in the text. As I mentioned before, we often read because we want to find some information in the text. So it's a little bit more difficult when it comes to the second language because the foreign words themselves can be some information that students pay attention to, and they might completely forget about everything else that is in this text about the meaning or some specific information that is there. So after you read the text for the first time, and when we read for the first time, we usually read for gist, just to understand the general idea of this text. It's a good idea to tell your students how to find some particular information in this text. You can ask some simple questions, or you can ask a question and find the information with them. As we said before, it is called modeling when you just show the example of how to do something. And then you can ask the second question that is about the similar information from the text, but now you can give your students the opportunity to find this information by themselves. And of course, encourage extensive reading and inform your students that if they know what kind of stories they like or what kind of books they read in their native language, they can try to do that in the second language now. The most important is to find something that is really interesting for them, something that they would read not only for educational purposes, but for pleasure itself. Maybe if they are beginners, yeah, it might be difficult for them to read something more serious, but you can offer them to find a book that they have already read in their native language. Maybe they read it a few years ago, they don't remember the details now, but if they remember that they like this book, it might be a good idea to try to read it in English. And they will be not afraid of losing the sense, yeah, the losing the content because they have already read everything and they might just remember what happened in the story. But at the same time, it will be an experience, a new experience for them of reading in a new language, which can give them the sense of achievement as well because they will feel the language, they will feel that they understand what is being written. Some students prefer short stories because they believe that it's easier. But in reality, When you read a book that isn't so short, um, it might be even more effective because most authors tend to use the same vocabulary or the same words again and again. So getting used, like after having gotten used to the vocabulary of the author, it might be easier for a reader to understand the story after like 10 or 20 pages. And the last skill that we are going to discuss today is writing. And the first recommendation is not to start teaching it so too early. Mm, some students might even tell you that they don't need writing in their life because nowadays you can text to your friends, you can write emails using some programs that can help you with that, and there are also people who don't write much these days. So we started our session with the statement that you need to listen to the needs of your students. That's why I also believe you should ask your students whether they need writing in their life, and if they say they don't, not to push them to learn how to do that. Of course, there is a writing section in maybe every unit of your course book, and it doesn't mean that you need to cover everything and to do everything with your students if they say that they don't need it. But even if they do need writing, it's not a good idea to start doing it from the very beginning because, as we said before, they need to listen to the language first. Then they need uh, to start speaking just like step by step, just a little bit at the beginning, and gradually to increase the amount of speaking that they do. And finally, uh, as you remember, I hope that listening and speaking are connected. You might understand that reading and writing are connected in the same way. So the more somebody reads, the better they can write. And that's why if your students need writing, they need to see examples first. So before they start writing their emails or their essays, give them as many examples as possible. Use them as texts for reading first, and gradually you can ask them to write their own stories or their own letters based on the examples that they have read. And of course, try to use the formats that your students need. Uh, don't ask them to write a letter to a friend from another country if they don't have any friends from other countries and if they aren't going to find one. Ask them where they use the second language in writing in their day-to-day life and try to understand what kind of writing they might need. Finally, I want to remind you how scary it is to start something new in your life. So please don't forget about the feelings of your students. Don't forget about this fear that they might have. And try to encourage them as much as possible. Try to give them lots of praise. Try to notice every little things that they do correctly and to inform them about it, to tell them how proud you are of them, that especially if they are adults, how proud you are of having such motivated and hardworking students. Thank you very much for being here with me today. I hope this information will be useful for you. And if you have questions, please write them down and we will discuss them later. Have a nice day. See you.